Tanzania is an East African country bordering the scenic Indian Ocean. It has averaged a high growth rate over the past decade, somewhere between 6 to 7% each year, thanks to its substantial natural resources and thriving tourism. In fact, its safaris are world-renowned. For many Chinese, the mention of Tanzania would remind them of the Tanzania-Zambia highway operating since the 1970s as a symbol of China-Africa friendship. So what is the current state of China-Tanzania relationship and how would it evolve in the near future? I'm pleased to be joined on the sideline of the China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo in Central China by Professor Palamagamba Kabudi, Tanzania's Foreign Minister and Minister for East African Cooperation. Professor Kabudi, thank you very much for joining us. So this is the first time that you visit outside Africa since you assumed your office as Foreign Minister and Minister of East African Cooperation. How would you describe the significance of this trip, and especially also coming to Hunan to attend this first ever China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo?
Indeed, this is my first visit outside Africa after I was appointed Minister for Foreign Affairs and East African Cooperation 3 months ago. And my coming to China as my first country since I was appointed is not by accident. It is strategic. It is symbolic, because this is the country I wanted to visit first before visiting any other country outside Africa for very good reasons. The relationship between Tanzania and China is long-standing relationship, unique, symbolic, and this is why China was my first point of call outside Africa. We've been together with China since the 1960s, when China was not a power in world politics. China has assisted Tanzania. China has assisted Africa in many other aspects. China assisted Africa in our liberation struggle. It trained our freedom fighters for Angola, for Mozambique, for Zimbabwe, for South Africa. And all these liberation movements were based in Tanzania. But also, at the time of need, between Tanzania and Zambia, because when Zambia became independent in 1964, it was surrounded by countries which were still under colonial rule, under the minority white regime in Rhodesia and South Africa, but under the Portuguese in Angola and Mozambique. It is China which assisted us in Zambia to build the Tanzania-Zambia Railway. Here it is known as Tansa-TLU, which is 1,860 kilometers. And this is why it is also known as the Liberation Railway. But also the relationship between Tanzania and China, which was established by Chairman Mao Zedong and Madam Julius Kambarage Nyerere, is a relationship which has grown to today, when now we are meeting here in Changsha, in Hunan, to experience one of the critical decisions made by President Xi Jinping of now ensuring that China and Africa cooperate in more and more areas of win-win cooperation with win-win outcome in trade and investment. And this is why, for me, it is also historical to come to Hunan, the home and the province of Mao Zedong, whom as a very young person I admired, and he was a beacon of hope for any country which was fighting for self-reliance and for development.
Specifically, what are you looking for as business or trade or investment opportunities, and what do you think Tanzania can offer for Chinese investors and Chinese consumers?
Number one, what we are looking for China is what we have always looked for China, for solidarity and friendship. The rest comes after. So number one, I'm here in China to tell the Chinese people that the solidarity and the friendship of Tanzania to China, as it was 55 years ago when we established our first diplomatic relations, as it was 54 years ago when Tanzania was the first country in East and Central Africa to sign a friendship treaty with China here in Beijing, when no other African countries were ready to do so. So that is what we have come to say. Here you have a trusted, trustworthy, unique friend. But more, we have come to China now to look for more investments, because China is investor number one in Tanzania. We would want to consolidate that relationship of investing in Tanzania, but also now we want to address the trade balance, which means Tanzania is looking for opportunities to sell her products to China, be they food products, be they finished products, so that now we also balance our trade deficit between Tanzania and China.
China has grown tremendously since the 1960s, 1970s, and what kind of new impetus are you looking for in this relationship to help also the development of Tanzania?
Definitely, China today is the second largest economy in the world, and it has done so in a span of 70 years, which means, one, we would want to learn from China, which has been able to transform her country in the span of 70 years. And the most important thing here is the issue of science, technology, but also development of skilled labor and the human resource. That is what we also want to learn from China, to see how also we are going to be able to develop in a shorter span of our time. China took 70 years, we would want to also take 70 years to be where China is. But China is the most reliable country in terms of technology transfer, skills transfer, and that is what we are looking for in China, as it was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Now in the 2020, China is leading also in ICT and technology. Those are the areas which we would also want to tap from China, but also bring our young people to learn such issues. Today, you have the biggest telecommunication companies in the world. Today, you are leading in many other aspects of industry. And there's a lot of what Tanzania can be led. But we also believe China has something to learn from Tanzania, which means it won't be only one-way traffic, but two-way traffic. We believe there are certain aspects that China can also come and learn from our people and from Tanzania.
Elaborate a little bit on the other side, other direction of the traffic, please.
The other direction of the traffic which we think China can learn something from Africa. One is how to develop tourism. We have a lot of tourist attractions in Africa, but also the question of antiquities and old civilization. I've been reading books written in China. Less is written about the old civilizations of Africa. Tanzania is the cradle of humankind. That is where it is believed that the first human beings were able to walk on their two legs, after walking using their legs and hands in Ngorongoro and in Olduvai Gorge. So these are the aspects which China can also learn. China can come and learn something about creative arts, but also our music and culture.
I'm going to ask you this question, however, because there are a lot of criticism of the kind of debt distress or debt burden that China is potentially imposing on its African partners. For instance, just earlier this year, according to media reports, there is this port project in Bagamoyo, which is supposed to have been put on halt by your court or by your president, saying that the Chinese is using exploitive or unfair terms in terms of lending to Tanzania. How do you react to that? I mean, as Chinese, I understand, of course, there are cases, right, where there are companies or there are individuals or that are probably not operating on the soundest business terms. But how do you look at these frictions in the relationship between the two sides?
No, we have no frictions.
Not even frictions.
Differences of perception are not differences. So one, I would want to correct your question. You are using an example which is not appropriate in the case of debt
because
debt trap.
Western media, for instance,
that
Reuters,
is the Western media. You are
because Reuters, for instance, is quoting this as a very important story, talking about the kind of obstacle that
and it's very good you are saying it is Reuters. It's very good you are saying it is Reuters. First of all, this is not the first time China is being accused of such pretentious fabrications. In the 1960s, China was portrayed in the same manner. And it is on 26th of February 1965 in Beijing, where our founding father of the nation, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, told the world, nobody should choose friends for us or enemies for us. China, we have chosen China to be our friend, and time will tell. And indeed, at that time China was not even a member of the UN. And Tanzania is one of those countries which fought hard, campaigned hard in the UN to make sure that China is restored back in the UN and that it regains its seat in the Security Council. So such examples which the Reuters is saying, they do not reflect the unique, special relationship between Tanzania and China. And that relationship, this unique, special, all-weather relationship is guaranteed. Differences of perceptions, difference of opinions in one or two things may happen, but that does not mean Tanzania is taking China as a colonial power. On the question of debt trap, again, it is not true. what is being portrayed. Africa has borrowed more from the World Bank. Africa has borrowed more from Europe. And if you look at the aggregate of the loans we have borrowed from World Bank and Europe, they are far more than what we have borrowed from China. But what is important, no country in the world has developed without borrowing. The big powers are borrowing.
Yeah.
I want to believe also China is borrowing. What is important? You borrow that money to do and do what? We borrowed from China to build the infrastructure. We borrowed from China to build hydroelectric power stations, to generate electricity. We borrowed from China to do many other projects. So for me, the perception of Reuters, which wants to believe there's a friction between Tanzania and China, is not only fallacious, but is part of the Western propaganda, which has been there from the 1960s to today. So I wouldn't want to associate myself with such kind of propaganda, not because it is propaganda, but because it wants to deter us and remove us from the focus of enhancing our bilateral cooperation, which, as I said, is unique and all-weather.
Let me ask you one more question,
yes,
which is very much in the spotlight, or has been in the spotlight as well,
yes,
about China's relationship with Tanzania. Yeah. And you probably know already what I'm going to talk about, the ivory trade, the poaching of elephants, and
yeah,
so China has this ban at the
yes,
end of
yes,
2016 to ban the sale of
yes,
ivory products, and yet people are saying it is work in progress. There's still a lot more needs to be done.
Yeah.
So could you brief us a little bit on what kind of actions are being taken to your knowledge by the Chinese side and with the Tanzanian side to further protect wildlife in Tanzania?
First of all, I would really want to applaud the government and the people of China under the leadership of President Xi Jinping, which has come openly to condemn and distance itself from this horrendous business of ivory, which has caused decimation of elephant population in many other African countries, including Tanzania. Tanzania has taken efforts to curb elephant poaching, and now the population of elephants is rising as compared to the past. This is why we applaud the position of China, one of openly distancing itself from the ivory business, banning ivory business in China, but also going forward to condemn all those who are involved in this kind of horrendous acts. But more, it has not interfered in our courts prosecuting all those people who have been involved in illegal ivory trade, including some Chinese citizens. So for us, the cooperation between Tanzania and China when it comes to issues of environment and natural resources, it will include a joint effort of combating illegal trade of ivory. After all, it's not only China which was being subjected to this kind of business, but all other East Asian countries. So I believe other East Asian countries will emulate China in openly banning the ivory trade in their countries, so that the demand, which also propels supply of this ivory, is curtailed and bring to a stop. As I said, friendship, which is all weather. It means there are ups and downs, there are good times, but also there are challenges, and that does not mean this friendship is shaken or is diluted. Once again, I want to assure you and the listeners that the friendship between Tanzania and China is unshakable, and we've been together in many other difficult situations, and I'm sure we'll be able also jointly to bring this illegal trade of ivory to an end, and therefore China will again be a leader in the prohibition of ivory trade in Southeast Asia.
Thank you so much, Professor Kabudi, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and East African Cooperation of Tanzania. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Central China's Hunan Province. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching.